Skinwalker encounter at my grandparents' cabin. My grandparents have a cabin in a town in Pennsylvania, south of Scranton. Every summer, we usually go up for a few weeks as a family event. Ever since I was little. A few years ago, we decided to go up in the winter because my family wanted to go skiing at some point. After we got there, the weird things started happening really quickly and seemingly out of nowhere. The house was built in the 1920s old brick and wood home. The doors are these giant, almost church-looking doors, and the style of the home is very medieval, definitely adding to the creepy vibes of the home. The first night was seemingly calm through the house, but whenever I went there, I always felt there was something watching me, or something lurking through the halls. The first night, I got up to go to the bathroom at around 3:10 a.m., which is also interesting because I never get up to go to the bathroom back at home. Most nights I sleep right through without waking up. There were 8 of us in the house, my 2 parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, and my 2 male cousins. I went to one of the 3 main bathrooms, 4 in the house if you count the master. So when I heard someone was in there, I thought that was interesting because I was one of the few people who doesn't share the bathroom. But I stood outside waiting to make sure I did not intrude on anything going on in there, as my one cousin can get quite upset and I didn't want to bother him. What was extremely weird is the fact that whatever was in there didn't sound human in its movements. It seemed to drag its feet around, which made me nervous that he may be sick. I called out his name a few times. "Drew, are you okay in there? It's been a long time and I want to go to bed." Or something along those lines. A few seconds later, he comes out of his bedroom and asks me why I'm making so much noise, tells me he's trying to sleep, and slams his door behind him. Before I could freak out, he had already shut the door, and I was too scared to even yell back to him. I never realized before that the door wasn't even locked in the first place, which made me feel even more uneasy. Between the banter, I never realized the sound stopped, and it didn't seem like anyone was even in the bathroom anymore. I still even tell myself this was just my imagination going wild, but I'm not known for sleepwalking or having any type of sleep disorder. I decided to just open the door, brushing it off as my too vivid imagination. When I opened the door, it looked like nothing strange had happened in there, but when I was washing my hands, I realized the window was open, and I froze, thinking someone had broken into the house. But this was on the 2nd story with nothing to climb up on, making it almost impossible to climb up there. The next day, nothing happened in the daytime, making it seem more to me that it was just a figment of my imagination than reality. But that night, I had to let out my dog. She's elderly and never really barks much, nor does she run fast, so this definitely is a case for concern, I thought. When I let her out, she bolted to the edge of the woods and vanished inside them. I tried to follow her barking, but honestly, I was too scared to go into the woods past the tree line. When I finally got her to walk back, her back legs seemed off, almost like a person pretending to be a dog walking on the ground. Her eyes were also off. They looked human-like, not her usual dark almond eyes. I freaked out and ran back inside without her. When I got inside, she was sitting panting by the door, so she must have ran back in when I was yelling into the woods to try to find her. At this point, I didn't even want to leave that house for fear of what was lurking in the woods. I had no previous information on skinwalkers or even knew what they were, so I had not connected the dots yet. The last night we stayed there was the most interesting and confusing turn of events that had happened. We had skied all day, so we went to bed quite early, around 9:10. I never fall asleep early, as I am usually a night owl. But I woke up around 12 a.m. to sounds of my cousin Drew yelling outside. I woke up in a fog and tried to quickly rush to the door and open it. I didn't even take into consideration that the door was still locked from the inside. When I got outside, his voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions and echoing through the valley. I saw him by the cars yelling, and when I started to go outside and call out his name, he looked at me quickly. His eyes got huge, and he ran into the woods with a beckoning gesture for me to follow. I decided that was definitely a bad idea, so I woke up his parents, and he ended up being asleep in his room the whole time. Not now until years later did I even find out about skinwalkers from one of my Native American friends I met in college. I still have no idea what was out there that weekend, and I haven't been back since. I adopted a dog from the shelter, but I'm starting to think he isn't a dog at all. Buster, Ace, Milo. My fiancé Victor continued to list potential names for the new addition to our family. I wanted a baby, he said not yet, and so we settled on getting another dog. We already had 3, my Welsh Terriers, Goldie and Teddy, and his miniature poodle, Fifi, but what harm could one more do? We'd both had our other dogs since they were puppies and had planned on doing the same for the next one until a friend recommended rescuing an older dog. After looking into it, we found an adorable pup named Joey. He was a 1-year-old English Mastiff mix, a mutt unlike our other dogs, but he had those same captivating brown eyes. His previous owners gave him up because they hadn't expected him to get so big, but we didn't care about that. We felt he belonged with us, no matter his size. After all, he was clearly a gentle giant. Upon meeting him, I realized just how big he really was, but Victor seemed to have fallen in love already, so I didn't comment on it. Joey was playful but chill, and I knew my reservations would leave in no time. How could I look into those big blue eyes and not love him? I thought to myself, wait a second, blue? I could have sworn his eyes were brown a moment ago. Strange. When we brought him home, Goldie and Teddy didn't take much notice, whilst Fifi growled and hid behind the couch. Joey didn't get aggressive back, he simply looked up at me in confusion, so I hoped that in time they'd get along better. Not much changed in most aspects of our life. Fifi didn't seem to be liking him anymore, but I knew to give it time. She wasn't exactly struck on my 2 when Victor and I first moved in together, but now they cuddle and play all the time. Still, it seemed her fears were getting worse. I'd wake up in the night to find her in the strangest hiding places, shaking and whimpering but unharmed. Joey was always nearby, just looking around perplexed by the situation. One day, I could have sworn I saw him bare his teeth at her in the mirror when my back was turned, but only for a split second, as if he didn't want me to see. I became more on edge around him, keeping him in the kitchen during nights while the other dogs stayed in the bedroom. He didn't seem bothered by this arrangement, and Victor said I was being paranoid, but not long after all, our food started going bad. It was as if somebody had taken all the refrigerated items out for the night, even eaten some, then put it all back in before we woke up. As I held rotten food in my hands and looked into his eyes, I knew something was wrong with that dog, and I felt he was challenging me. I put a kennel in the backyard and kept him there overnight instead. Then dead animals started showing up all over the grass, their organs completely missing. When I so much as raised my voice at him for committing such a heinous act, he snarled at me. He was showing more and more aggression, not just to me, but to our other 3 dogs, especially Fifi. When I mentioned to Victor I was worried Joey was going to hurt her, he got mad. How could you say such a sweet, gentle dog would ever do that? And to Fifi, too? You know how much she means to me. Fifi and another dog belonged to his sister, but his sister and the other dog passed in a car accident a couple of weeks before we met. I didn't want to upset him further, so I dropped it. That was until I woke up to whimpers, screams in the middle of the night, and ran downstairs to see Joey in the living room tearing Fifi to shreds. There was insides everywhere, and I don't think I'll ever get the image of her blood smudged around his mouth out of my mind. I've never cried out for help so loudly. Victor came running and instinctively turned the lights on to see pieces of a stuffed toy strewn around the room. He then proceeded to berate me for my behavior. Seriously, Rachel? What the F been up with you lately? Why are you so out to get this innocent dog? All the while Joey's eyes bore into me, looking more sinister and soulless than ever. I'd had enough of the mind games. The final straw was 3 nights ago. I awoke to a figure looming over me in the darkness. It was grotesque. Its limbs looked out of place, and every part of it looked disproportionate and broken. At first I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Its eyes met mine, and immediately I knew what it was. Joey. Out of his disguise. I turned to Victor and shook him awake as fast as I could, but by the time he turned over, Joey was a dog again, sitting beside the bed. Victor just looked at me, shook his head in disapproval, and went back to sleep. I sent Joey out of the room and did the same. The next morning I was surprised with a weekend getaway. We hastily packed our bags, and Victor solemnly said goodbye to Joey, as the place only allowed small dogs. A friend would be coming over later to pick Joey up to stay with him while we were away. I didn't tell Victor, but I was relieved. For the first time in the past month, I felt that me and my babies were safe. We hopped into the car and headed toward our destination. Once we were a good 50 miles away from home, Victor said to me, "You know, last night, right before you woke me up?" Dreading the argument that was sure to come, I nodded and he continued, "Well, I saw it too. Anthony's not picking Joey up, and Animal Rescue is. I told them he was aggressive and uncontrollable. They're, going to put him down. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. We're currently at my parents' house until we feel comfortable back at ours, if we ever do. Still, I'm not so sure this is the end." Skinwalker at the gas station. This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to tell it. My friend is of Wikinakvi heritage, a Native American tribe who settled the Pacific Northwest coast. He is quite the character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10", and has the blackest eyes you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of giants. He was working at a gas station up north back in 1992, and he pretty much always worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when he was relieved. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and they were few. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer of the ways of the old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes, and some soda, and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But as my friend looked out the window toward the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now the window is located on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof are pretty strong halogen lights which shine into the gas station. This gives the gas station not only an eerie lighting with the blinds casting long striped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it. Even if it was a wolf, he was inside, and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of the TV. A couple of hours go by, and not a single customer has entered since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that, but it came from the back, and behind the building they keep the garbage. The gas station had been visited before by scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever ventured there to leave, as he had had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe, just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walking past the window he was just sitting by. As he turned the corner, he shines the light toward the dumpsters. As the cone of light hits the dumpsters, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, scouring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog, though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as himself. It couldn't be a bear, as it was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station, and he wasn't followed. He locked the door, stayed inside the whole night, and quit the next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shape-shifting shaman of sorts that are a common occurrence in Native American lore and culture. So sorry for the absence of blood, guts, and glory. It's just a really creepy story. Skinwalker. I won't reveal who I am or much about where I live, and to be honest, it's been a few months since this happened, but I just came to terms with it now, and I have to warn people about what's out there, what they knew, what we don't. Warning, this is a very long read and some of the content below is very disturbing, but I can't hold back. Here's my story. Occasionally, I like to go hiking with my friends. There's not much more to do, honestly. We live in a small mountain town in Colorado. It was fun at first, but by now, we know the trails by heart. By the end of last summer, there was only one we hadn't tried. Now, there's a reason for that. The trail goes right through a portion of the forest that the Ute people considered sacred. I'll admit, I have hang-ups when it comes to these things. You don't wear hats in a church. You don't let the American flag touch the ground. You don't trudge all over somebody's sacred land for the fun of it. Still, my friend, we'll call him Mark, convinced me to go. He said that regardless of whether I went, he'd go anyway. And since no one else was going, he managed to goad me into going with him. That's another one of my hang-ups. Don't go hiking alone. Don't let friends go hiking alone. Too many tragic news stories start that way. So I ended up going with him, reluctantly. The whole way there, he was talking about how this was the coolest trail he'd ever been on. Yes, he had been there before, though only once. His manipulative ploy had been to get me to come with so he could show me. He admitted this all in the casual way that friends admit being asses to friends. Sometimes I didn't blame him. I had a tendency to have a stick up my butt, and what followed only reinforced it. We arrived at about 9, I remember, giving us plenty of time. It was farther away from town than most trails, and it wasn't near a paved road, so there was a lot of walking just to get there. No tourists knew about it, a lot of locals, and even some Ute didn't know about it. But if you followed a game trail through a bunch of trees, it would widen out and lead its way through some mountainous, densely forested terrain. What struck me was how quiet it was. This, apparently, was what Mark found so awesome. For some reason, in this particular place, you couldn't hear any birds chirping or any wildlife whatsoever. It was complete and utter silence. Eventually, I had to urinate. I stepped off of the main road, just so Mark wouldn't see me. As I was going, I spotted something through the trees. It looked like some sort of clearing, just past a shallow creek, with a log going over it. My curiosity got the better of me as I looked at the log. It didn't seem to be an act of nature. It was a makeshift bridge, I was sure. True enough, when I tested it, it seemed to be stable. I put one foot in front of the other and crossed. When I reached the other end, I pulled my way through some trees and saw the first image of the day that I will never forget, though to many it wouldn't have seemed like much. In front of me, there was vegetation, trees, ferns, and brush, but suddenly it all stopped. Within a perfect circle, surrounded by small, perfectly arranged rocks, there was nothing but smooth dirt. It was strange, not in the least, because the shape of the rocks was absolutely perfect. They were partially submerged in the soil and fit together like bricks. Every single one of them was the same uniform white color, and as I got closer, I saw things had been carved on them, symbols. They were old, very old. Even if I had understood them, their distinct shapes had been lost over the years. That was strange, but what disturbed me was that this circle wasn't actually perfect. On one edge, just one, a group of rocks had been kicked up. They were scattered around, as if they actually had been a perfect brick wall and something had shattered them. In this area, the otherwise perfectly smooth dirt had been kicked up. There was something about it that just unsettled me. As quiet as the entire forest was, it felt quieter here. I quickly turned around and went back to Mark, who made some lame number 2 joke. I should have forced him to leave right there. Instead, though, we kept going. After all, the day was only halfway over. While the forest itself was cool, at least from Mark's perspective, I found the trail to be rather disappointing. It just went on and on. There were no alternate paths, and there was hardly any challenging terrain. For Colorado, this whole area was so flat it was hardly a hike at all. The trail was just long, very long. It took us until noon to reach the end, and there was no one else on it. I know that it was a hard trail to find, and many of the other locals might share my sentiments, but we were there all day, and we didn't run into anyone. Of course, it wasn't until we reached the end that things started getting really weird. The trail didn't loop at all, and I inwardly groaned, knowing that we'd be walking these 3 same boring hours back. We took our time eating lunch. As we did, I could swear I heard noises for the first time. There were animals moving through the forest nearby. We could hear the rustling of the brush. I looked and saw through the foliage the vague outline of a single buck's head moving past us. It was odd, but I dismissed it. We packed up what was left of our lunches and started the trek back. Every once in a while I would hear the rustling again. I'd look into the trees, and oftentimes I would see the buck's head. Eventually, though, I noticed that it was making far too much noise and was doing so far too frequently. I told Mark to slow down and stop, and being Mark, he cracked a joke about it. But finally he went silent, and we both still heard the rustling. Now even Mark was a little freaked out. He turned back and saw the vaguest outline of the buck's head again. This time, to me, there seemed to be something wrong. The head was far too high up, around the higher branches of the trees. I noticed it. Mark didn't. I should have said something, but I didn't have time. Just as soon as it was there, it was gone again, going off further into the forest. I remember Mark talking about how deer were annoying as hell, about how he was going to scare it off or something. I don't remember exactly what he said, and that bothers me because I should remember. He was one of my best friends. I do remember him yelling at it, and at the time it was funny. "Hey, Buck, yeah, you horny MF, leave us alone." He walked off the road and disappeared down a ridge behind a layer of trees, pursuing it. For a minute there was silence. That minute became 2. "Mark?" I called out. No answer. 5 minutes passed. I climbed down the ridge after him. "Mark?" I followed the general direction he had gone in, keeping the way back to the road in mind. I wouldn't go far, I knew, because he was smart enough not to go far. He hadn't. After a short time I found a place where there were signs of a struggle. In addition, there was blood. There was a lot of blood. It was all over the trees and the ground. I cursed to myself. There were other things, too, in addition to the blood. Pieces of flesh that I didn't like to look at. There were marks showing that something had been dragged away from here. "Mark!" I called out furiously now. Forgetting the trail for a second, I ran forward along the drag marks. After running too far to be safe, I reached a small ravine with a creek running through it. I narrowly stopped myself. It wasn't a long drop, but it had hurt you, and a sprained ankle in the middle of the forest was bad news. The trail stopped here. "Mark," I murmured, then called out again, "Mark!" Something heard, but it wasn't Mark. Across the ravine from me, I heard a rustling and saw the trees stirring. Something stepped through the foliage and revealed itself. This was the second image burned into my mind. Please give me a second. I've spent every day for the past few months trying to tell myself this wasn't real. At first I saw a head, the head of a buck, but it came forward and I realized that it was 7 feet above the ground. I was staring a 7-foot creature straight in the face that had a massive buck's head but a humanoid body. The creature snorted. Its buck face remained neutral, scared looking even, as if it wasn't sure of the malicious whims of the body beneath it. There was blood dripping from its horns, which were not at all like the horns of the average buck, but jagged, pointed, and unorganized. A mess of sharp, bloody points. Its human body was dark-skinned and naked, with very human genitalia. Its penis was dripping blood, just like its horns, implying things that I don't want to think of. I remember both its arms and its legs. They started human, but near the bottom they started distorting and became animalistic. At the ends of its legs were powerful hooves. At the ends of its arms were hands with long claws, every bit as jagged at the horns on its head. In one of those claws, Mark's body was being held by his shirt. I examined him only briefly, just long enough to notice that the shape of his head was not what it had once been. For a moment there was silence. I didn't scream. I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Then the creature's ears ruffled. It dropped Mark's body apathetically and started backing up. Its deer head hung lazily to the side as it moved. My brain rang suddenly. It's going to jump the gap. It's coming for me. With the logical side of my mind shut off, I turned around and ran, hopefully in the exact opposite direction of the way I came. Behind me I heard a powerful grunt, and then a scuffle of the monster landing on the bank. There was a horrifying roar, something that sounded like a buck and a grizzly bear shouting together. I had never run so fast or so desperately in all my life, but it was gaining on me. As I ran through the forest, I started to feel its warm, hungry breath on my back. Its hands were extending, and I swear I could feel one of its claws scratch me. I ran and scurried up the bank leading to the path. I don't know how I got there without it grabbing me, but I did. Then I took off down the road, hoping that I was going the right direction. While running, I threw off my backpack and gained some speed. I think the bank delayed it, slightly. That's the only reason I can account as to how I may have gotten ahead of it. Somehow I ran and ran and ran. I didn't stop. Eventually I didn't hear it anymore, but I didn't care. I kept running. I had never been a long-distance runner, but my adrenaline was not going to wear off anytime soon, and I intended to take advantage of it. When I reached the end of the trail and saw the road again, I couldn't believe it. I got into my car. Just before I took off, I shot a glance back up at the trail, at the point where it went up between two mountains and was visible from the road. I would regret it. Standing there, near the beginning of the trail, was the Skinwalker, as I've come to call it. It had given up its chase, but it stood there, watching me hungrily, waiting to see if I would come back. Its deer head hung lazily and dead to the side. The blood on its body was beginning to dry. It had run the whole trail, and it didn't look tired at all. I twisted the ignition, floored the car, and never came back. They never found Mark, and I would never explain what happened. No one would believe me, though I needed to tell someone, which is why I'm posting it here. It came back to me in dreams, nightmares, that creature, the Skinwalker. Somehow I doubt that forest was really sacred. In fact, I'm sure it was the opposite. Because the image that flashes through my mind most often is not the horrific creature. It isn't Mark's mutilated corpse. It's that circle, which must have been maintained over the years by those who knew, those who understood, that old circle left alone for so long that had been quietly penetrated. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by leaving a comment below. Your feedback helps me create more content you'll love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more updates. See you in the next video.